Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Es ist gewisslich an der Zeit, which translates to I stand before thy manger fair. This is a very straightforward chorale. A little bit of interesting harmony here and there, but it's largely straightforward, so we're just going to hop right into the analysis. Two flats in the key signature. We start on B flat major. We end on B flat major. This is a key we haven't seen in quite some time. The overall tonality of this chorale is B flat major. We start on 1, and then we have 3 voices moving off of the harmonic rhythm here. We have C, and we have E flat, and it's almost as if we have like a passing 2-7 chord here, but I don't think exactly that's what's happening because the chord's not entirely intact, and even though the chord's being referenced here, it's also equally possible that we have a rootless, like an A diminished chord here with this B being suspended in the melody. There are different ways to think about this. All in all, there's not an entirely intact chord here, so I'm going to not analyze. I'm not going to put anything on the page, but just know that we kind of have a bit of a C minor 7 chord here, or some type of rootless A diminished chord in passing here before we get D, B flat, F, and B flat, which is our tonic in first inversion. So we'll just change the figured bass, passing tone in the melody here, and then we have C, F, B flat, and D. This C is probably an accented non-chord tone, and again we have another B flat major triad here, but this time in root position, so we'll just change the figured bass, and that takes us to F, F, A, and C. That is our 5 chord F major with a passing 7 in the bass, in the tenor, before we get G, D, G, and B flat, which is our 6 chord G minor. A bit of a deceptive progression here with a passing 7th in the bass. E, C, G, and C spells C minor in first inversion. 2-6, very typical precadential or predominant chord. 6 going to 2 is also a very good sign as well. This deceptive progression turns into like a turnaround that takes us back to the dominant. This B flat is our chordal 7th, but it's going to be a non-chord tone in this context. We then have F, B flat, F, and C. This B flat sort of operating like a 4-3 suspension over the bass, but the A that it resolves to turns into the third of the chord, making this F, A, F, and C, which is our 5 chord. And then we end the phrase with an imperfect authentic cadence, B flat, F, and D, which is our tonic triad in root position. Moving ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence at the end of the next phrase, still in the key of B flat. We start off with B flat, D, F, and B flat, no need to reanalyze. Passing tone in the melody, we do have a passing tone in the melody coincidentally here, but we also have a passing tone in the tenor. We then have B flat, F, B flat, and D, which is our tonic triad in root position again, we don't need to reanalyze. And then we have A, G, B flat, and E flat. It's likely that this A flat's sort of like an accented non-chord tone, just like we saw here in the first measure. It's also happening at the same point metrically as well, so maybe there's some symmetry being drawn between the two chords. This is E flat in first inversion, E flat over G, and then we get A, F, C, and F, which is F major over A. It's 5-6 with a passing 7th in the melody here. We then have B flat, F, B flat, and D, which is our tonic triad in root position. Then we have E, G, B flat, and C. We know that Bach loves 2-6-5 chords, C minor 7 over E flat. Especially in cadential situations, Bach loves 2-6-5 chords. We then have F, F, A, and C. It's our 5 chord F major, passing 7th in the tenor, and then we cadence on B flat, D, F, and B flat, which is our tonic triad. So all in all, fairly straightforward harmony so far. We're going to be moving into the next phrase where we still continue in the key of B flat. No real interesting harmony so much. There is a little bit of a quirky progression here that actually harkens back to the chorale that that we looked at yesterday, or at least a point that I made in yesterday's chorale, but we'll get to it when we get to it. We start off with B flat, F, and D, so we don't need to reanalyze. Passing tone in the bass before we get D, B flat, F, and D, which is our tonic again, but this time it's in first inversion. The reason why I'm rewriting the Roman numeral here as opposed to just changing the figure base has to do with the fact that I'm moving down a system. The fact that I'm changing lines means that I want to reiterate the fact that we have the same chord here. You could leave that out and just keep analyzing as if it were one long line, but for me it just helps with the continuity of the reading if someone was following along in a line. It also helps keep me organized as well. We have another passing tone in the bass as well before we get F, A, F, and C, which is our 5 chord, F major, passing 7th in the alto, and then we have G, B flat, D, and B flat. Very similar chord progression to our first phrase here, sort of just a different take on it actually. This is G minor in root position. This G is our first, is a chord tone, it's the root of the chord. And then we go to A, C, G, and A. I reckon this G is a 7/6 suspension over the bass. This F sharp is actually our chord tone, and this F sharp diminished chord would be a secondary leading tone chord, 7/6 of 6, and it's going to resolve to 6, G, D, G, and B flat, which is, like I just said, our 6. And the interesting thing about this chord progression is that we recently saw a chord progression that consisted of 2 chords, one being the chord that would be resolved to its secondary dominant, or in this case it's a secondary leading tone chord, but they both function the same way, followed by the same chord that started the progression. Do we modulate to the key of G minor here because we see the tonic separated by its own dominant? I don't hear it that way. I think this first G minor is mostly coincidental, and we haven't quite, with the context that we haven't quite stepped into the realm of modulation, especially seeing that this 6 is just going to pivot towards the tonic, and we will eventually end the phrase with a half cadence in the key of B flat major. So it's kind of interesting that Bach spends this much time focusing on G minor, proportionate to the phrase being in B flat. I think this early G minor here is just a coincidence in terms of like the function or implying that we've modulated. If you do think there's a mid-phrase modulation going on here where we briefly visit the key of G minor, I think that's totally valid as well. Just I don't hear it that way. But with this G in the bass, we have 3 non-chord tones here. We have E flat, A, and C, which is, with this G in the bass, A minor 7 flat 5 over G, which is 7/4/2. The G in the bass I feel is more incidental than anything else. It is functioning like a 7th because it is a shared tone between the 2 chords, but all in all I don't think it's super important in the grand scheme of things. So when you look at this 4/2 chord, we would expect it to resolve down by step to a first inversion triad, or a first inversion chord that is a 5th away, or more specifically a 5th below the 7. So we would expect this to resolve to a 3/6/4 chord, but we don't get that. We actually get a first inversion B flat major chord, D, F, B flat, and D. So this is an interesting sort of resolution of a 4/2 chord if you look at it that way, but really this is more so just a passing 7 chord, and it just so happens that its 7th is being held in the bass. So this being a 4/2 chord, do take that with a grain of salt. After our 1/6 chord, we have another passing tone in the bass before we get F, F, A, and C, which is our 5 chord in root position. Now there are a couple of different ways that we could analyze this. In my notes I had this analyzed as a direct modulation right to the key of G minor. This F doesn't quite feel like, or at least the first time I listened to it, it didn't quite feel like it was a progression to the key of G minor. It felt like this was a separate idea and we moved to the key of G minor after the fact. But we have seen single lines here where Bach modulates using the subtonic and then goes to the key of G minor. So I think that you could analyze this as a common chord modulation, but after just talking myself through it, I am going to commit to the fact that it is a direct modulation because these are 2 separate ideas. They don't really feel they don't quite feel connected to one another harmonically. It doesn't feel like we're continuing the progression into the next phrase like we do with some other modulations that are common chord. But all in all, Doesn't matter whether you analyze it as a common chord or as a direct modulation. That's very minute in terms of the grand scheme of the chorale. What matters is that you see that the next phrase is in the key of G minor. And more specifically, or this is a phrase that is in the key of G minor. I was going to say we get another half cadence, and this is a special kind of half cadence called a Phrygian half cadence, which again, not super important in the grand scheme of things, but it's interesting to see how many Phrygian half cadences there are in comparison to all of the half cadences there are in minor keys. So we start the phrase off with F sharp, D, A, and C, which is D7 over F sharp. That's 5, 6, 5 in the key of G minor. And then we move to G minor, G, D, A, and B flat. This A is a 9/8 suspension over the bass, but we know that our tonic is being implied. We then have D, D, G, and A. 9/8 suspensions often lead to 4/3 suspensions in the same voice. And this F sharp is actually our chord tone, making this a D major chord in root position. D, D, F sharp, and A. We then go back to G minor, G, D, G, and B flat, our tonic triad, passing tone in the bass, B flat, D, D, and F. A bit of an interesting progression here, 1 going to 3, B flat major. It's kind of an interesting sound, not two chords that you typically see contextualized one after the other, but here we are seeing them. Passing 7th in the bass, passing tone in the tenor, before we get G, B flat, D, and B flat. And even more interestingly, we go from 1 to 3, and then back to 1 again. A very fascinating progression, a very stable progression. Typically, we don't see 3 and 1 operate in and around one another. Typically, one is used in place of the other, but regardless, here we see 1, 3, and 1 used in very close proximity to one another, and over a long swath, or a large swath of this particular phrase, which is pretty cool. Passing 7th in the bass, passing tone in the tenor, and then we get E, G, G, and C, which is C minor over E flat. That is 4, 6, which is a typical, or pretty much the typical pre-cadential chord or predominant chord in a Phrygian half cadence. Sometimes you can see 2, 4, 3 thrown into the mix, but it's typically always contextualized with a 4, 6 somewhere in the texture. So it's either a 4, 6 just there and unmistakable, or 4, 6 is somewhere buried in the texture. But after our 4, 6 chord, we do cadence on 5, D, A, F sharp, and D, and we're going to be leading into our last phrase, which ends in the key of B flat like we would expect, because that is our macro key, just the overall tonality of the chorale. And unlike our previous move to the key of G minor, we're going to be going to the key of B flat via a common chord. And really, I think you could analyze the modulation to the key of B flat pretty much anywhere from the beginning of this phrase, but I hear it more around beat 2 or beat 3. We start with G minor, G, G, D, and B flat, which is our resolution from our 5 chord. It's our 1 chord here. Passing tones in the melody and the tenor. We then have G, B flat, G, and D again. Yeah, there's nothing really inherently B flat major like about hearing 5 going to 1 and then seeing another 1 chord. So it feels like it's happening after the fact, and probably a little closer to this F natural here if I were to have hedged my bets just based on what's going on visually. But after G minor, we have F, F, B flat, G, and E flat. I reckon this F is an accented non-chord tone, kind of looking similar to the E flat major chord we had here in our second phrase, but this is an E flat chord in root position. That's 6 in the key of G minor, and in the key of B flat major, it is our 4 chord. We then get D, B flat, F, and F, which is our tonic triad in first inversion. Passing tones in the upper voices before we get B flat, F, and D. That's just taking our same B flat major chord and putting it in root position. And as we're closing in on our cadence, we have E flat, B flat, G, and C, which is C minor, 7 in first inversion. We know that Bach loves 2, 6, 5 chords, especially in cadential situations. We then get F, A, F, and C, which is our 5 chord, F major, and after our passing 7th here in the alto, we move to our tonic, B flat, F, D, and B flat to close out today's chorale. All in all, really not too much to write home about. The 1-3-1 progression is particularly interesting. This extended tonicization is pretty interesting as well. This extended tonicization is pretty interesting as well, but the harmony in this chorale is fairly straightforward, and like I said, there's really not too much to write home about, so I think I'm just going to end the video on that note. Actually, before I do end the video, I want to mention the fact that we have what I'm analyzing as a direct modulation between two relative keys that tends to be rarer than common chord modulations between two keys. I mean, we do see it from time to time, but moving between B flat major and G minor, you know, with all the chords they have in common, you feel like it would be more of a smooth transition. But here, where Bach ends with a chord based on F natural to a chord that relies heavily on F sharp, they do feel like separate ideas rather than one continuous idea or a flowing chromatic bass line. It's kind of interesting how we get a segmented chromatic bass line here where we end on F and then it continues in the next phrase, and that was the big deciding factor for me analyzing this as a direct modulation. And that is what I will end the video on. So thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel by doing so. If you're interested in following me along on the journey to analyze all of the chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can hit the notification icon as well, and like the video if you enjoyed the content. Again, thank you so much for watching the video, and I hope you take care.